The most common version of burnout is often self-inflicted, not because they're weak, but because they were taught that working harder, longer, and more perfectly is how you stay safe. Nobody is coming to give you permission to stop. Hello, and welcome back to the Empower Her podcast. Today, I want to talk about burnout, but burnout from a little bit of a different perspective than most people have talked about it. I think people think of burnout as something that happens to you, right? When we think about burnout, we think about having a bad boss, toxic company, impossible workload. And a lot of times that is true and it is absolutely valid. But in my experience coaching women, and I've coached hundreds at this point, the most common version of burnout is often self-inflicted. Not because they're weak or doing something wrong, but because they were taught that working harder, longer, and more perfectly is how you stay safe. I'm someone that has fallen into this trap so many times. I mean, we had a bank holiday recently, a federal holiday, and, I typically work on bank holidays and I took the day off. And then I had a 4-day week and I ended up working all day Saturday because I felt stressed and I felt overloaded with work and I had anxiety about it and I wanted to get it done because I didn't feel like I finished everything on Friday and I was worried that I would get even more to do on Monday. So it was just felt really stressful and I felt like I was burning myself out, right? The perfectionism, the people pleasing, the hustle culture conditioning. And even though I've worked really hard to escape that, it isn't something that doesn't affect me at all. So this episode is coming from someone who has done and made really great strides and big strides in burnout, but who hasn't always solved it and who doesn't solve it all the time. And I am someone who catches myself doing it. So this is not, I figured it out and I'll teach you. Yes, I have tips. Yes, I have tricks. And these are all things that I abide by and that when I do them, they actually work. But it's a more of I'm with you and I want to help you understand your burnout, where it's coming from, why it's happening, and tips and tricks on how you can support your burnout. And again, I always come from a place of what's in your control. I think that's really important to me. I'm always thinking about what's in my control. What are the things that I can control, right? Because at the end of the day, there's so many things we can't control, but there are a lot of things we can control. So it's about really understanding those things and seeing what we can do. So first, I just want to talk about what burnout actually is versus what people think it is. Most people think it's, oh, you're just tired. It's what happens when your nervous system is on overdrive. And, yes, it can manifest as being tired. Yes, it can manifest as your nervous system being on overdrive. But it's this constant feeling of being on, of even on the weekend, not being able to turn your brain off, or outside of work hours, not being able to turn your brain off. It's when your nervous system doesn't know when to stop. And burnout is what happens when basically your body, your nervous system becomes your baseline. And that's what you know. So the way I look at it is like a cage. And many of the clients I work with are absolutely in genuinely difficult environments, right? But many of them are also holding the key to their cage that they put themselves in. And again, I want to acknowledge all the things that are outside of our control that cause burnout that are so real and that contribute, right? Again, toxic bosses, having impossible deadlines, cultures that reward overworking. I mean, I see what my clients are going through. I see sometimes the expectations they have and that have been put on them from their bosses and their colleagues and people around them. Like, it's insane. And I totally want to validate that. Those are all things that are real. But I also want us to look at the things that we're doing that cause burnout that are our choice. And in many cases, the environment is okay, but we as women still burn ourselves out. And that's what I really want to talk about in this episode. So just a couple of ways, just right off the top. And of course, we'll go through these in more detail, but that women self-inflict burnout without realizing. So things like working before the workday starts and working after it's already ended, never fully taking a lunch break, taking vacations but always being available and online, taking on more when they're already at capacity because saying no feels dangerous, checking emails at 10 p.m. because the anxiety of not checking feels worse than the cost of checking. These are just some of the ways that we inflict this in ourselves. And I think we have to ask ourselves too is, are these things expected of us? Or did we help normalize them and now they're expected of us, right? Because there's a difference between, our boss from day one saying, I expect you to be responding to emails up to 10 p.m. versus you did it once or twice and now it's an expectation, right? There is a difference. I don't want to lecture anyone, right? This episode is about holding up a mirror and seeing what are those things that we can do, what's in our power, because I'm always about taking our power back, right? My podcast is literally called Empower Her. It's about taking your power back and understanding what is it that you actually have control over, right? And, understanding that there's this mirror that I'm going to hold up in this episode and why women do this and why we do it, right? A lot of times there's deep-seated beliefs, not necessarily because we're workaholics, but because the behavior has a perceived payoff, right? Staying late feels like security, checking emails feels like control, saying yes feels like likability. This behavior makes sense. That's why it's so hard to stop, because there is a perceived payoff. The common thread here is that we're not trusting that it's safe to stop because we think if it stops or we stop, that something bad is going to happen. Typically the behavior is not the issue. We really want to get to the root belief underneath and what that really looks like. So let's talk about where this comes from. And there's always, typically with these situations, the mindset under the behavior, right? Many of my clients, came to me believing that working harder equals more security, right? I see this time and time again with my clients that they tell me when we talk about limiting beliefs, more money is more stability, more worth, so you have to work harder, right? That's typically the belief. And that belief doesn't disappear when circumstances change, right? If you're someone that's come from a not great socioeconomic background and you started to make more money, you'd possibly continue to feel like you have to hustle hard and make more and do more just to keep that, right? So it doesn't get lost. There's so many different mindsets that we can have. And this is where I see a lot of different patterns, right? So for example, as I mentioned, the woman who grew up without any money now earns well, but her body doesn't believe the security is real, right? I have the working mother who works herself into a ground and absorbs that as a definition of being a good woman, a good wife, a good mother. I have the woman who's praised her whole life for being the hardest worker in the room and doesn't know who she is without that identity, right? That's totally me. I'm someone that was always praised for doing well, for exceeding. In school, I did really well. And so I'm constantly looking for that praise to be quote unquote perfect, to do everything the right way, to go above and beyond, to have my leadership or whoever I'm working with, my client or whoever it is, to feel like I'm doing a great job. And so that's what that can lead to, that perfectionism, which can lead to that burnout, right? And again, like, these are things that we grew up with, and these are very ingrained. These mindsets are extremely ingrained in how we feel, how we think, how we show up. And so it's about understanding, first of all, where the beliefs come from, right? Where the programming comes from. Does it come from our parents? Does it come from our friends? Does it come from the community we grew up in? Does it come from cultural aspects? Because that can greatly impact it, right? So it's about understanding those beliefs, those deep-rooted beliefs about money, about success, about worthiness, and where those come from. Because typically I find that that's usually the base of where a lot of these limiting beliefs and where the burnout stems from. So it's about first identifying that. Now, the other thing that can greatly contribute to women feeling this way is a mix of hustle culture and perfectionism. Now, perfectionism I've kind of touched on, but there is this girl boss hustle culture that we've seen. And I think it's taken a big turn in the last few years. And it's definitely shifted, and I'm hoping it's going to shift into a better light overall. But it's about really understanding, like, okay, what is the hustle culture? What does that actually mean for me? And how can I create a life that I actually want without feeling like I need to do more than I'm physically capable of, right? And again, hustle culture is that glorification of being busy, the way women have been sold the idea that rest is laziness and productivity is virtue. We have absolutely been sold this, especially if you're eldest daughter, if you have that pressure on you culturally, you come from a different culture where it's about being productive. It's like, okay, you can't sit down. You always have to be doing something. So it's about understanding again, where does that come from? Who does it serve? Typically the patriarchy. I'm going to literally bring it up in every episode, but patriarchy. And why is it so hard to shake even when you know it's a lie, right? We don't berate men, although I do, but that's a whole nother conversation. We don't berate men for golfing all day on a Saturday, and then their wives are at home watching the kids and cooking and cleaning and doing all the things which they've done the rest of the week, right? Like, we've put this on ourselves in this hustle culture and this girl boss. It is the patriarchy is supporting this, and that's who benefits from this. Women used to not work, right? Women used to run the household. Well, what's happened is women started to work and they still run the household. Whether you have kids or not, it doesn't matter. We know that statistically women tend to take on more of the mental load, more of the housework, more of the responsibility in heterosexual relationships. And so if we're working hard at work, and we're overachieving at home, being a wife, being a partner, being a mom, being all those things, of course we're going to get burnt out, right? Of course we're going to get burnt out. And then we have the perfectionism, which it's not just about wanting things to be good, right? It's the belief that if something goes wrong, it will be catastrophic. It will be the end of the world. And that catastrophe will be your fault because you specifically didn't do enough. And that's just anxiety dressed as high standards, right? That's not about wanting things to be good. That's about having anxiety and doing so much so that you can prevent any negative feeling. And I feel this a lot because I'm always someone that thinks 100 steps ahead in every scenario. I'm always planning 100 steps ahead. I always have A, B, C, D plans. I always do things well in advance to account for any edits or changes that need to be made or any feedback. I'm always someone that wants to be seen as extra prepared, as extra ready to go. I mean, just a silly example, but we for last Christmas, actually it was Thanksgiving, we met with all of my family in Washington, D.C., where my dad lives. My mom came, my sister came, and everyone lives in different places, so everyone flew in. And, I'm a very strategic packer. I also make sure I pack everything. And, the way I see it is like the way I packed was, okay, I'm not going to pack certain things because my mom and my sister are coming. So I'm sure one of them will have it. Right. And usually I don't do that if I'm not going to like my mom's house or things like that. But I was like, they're going to be there. So I don't need to overpack now. Right. Like, I'm not going to somewhere else where I don't have them there. And I remember I got there and they kept asking me, oh, do you have this? Do you have that? And I'm like, no, I thought you brought it. And they're like, we just expected you to have it because you're always so prepared. And like, yes, on one hand, I was like, okay, that feels nice that they think I'm always prepared. But then I also kind of got irritated because I was like, well, why do I have to be the one that's always prepared? Why can't you be the one that's always prepared? So that's how a lot of times it can show up and how it can come up and how it can really present itself. And this shows up for me in work in many ways too, right? Like, a good example was this past weekend, which I mentioned is, I had Monday off for the bank holiday, and then I worked 4 days, and then I worked pretty much all day Saturday because I was stressed about all the things that I had to do, and I was worried that I would get even more work on Monday to do. I thought I wouldn't have enough time for everything. And yeah, I felt so much better on Saturday doing everything. And then come Monday, I get to have a quote unquote chill day because I overprepared and I didn't have a bunch of things come in like I thought maybe I would. And again, it's not about not hitting deadlines. Like well, you know, I'm way, way, way far in advance of everything that's never an issue. But I do like to over prepare. I do like to make sure that I have everything done that I need to. I do like to let people know about plans way in advance so they can schedule it in. Like there's just so many things I'm thinking of. And the thing with that is it's a big mental load to constantly be thinking about everyone else, about what's going to work, about planning ahead. It's a huge mental load. So that can really lead to burnout. So I want to talk about specifically in your career and in your job, what are things that you can actually do to support your burnout and to set boundaries at work? Now, some of these things may seem obvious, but from my experience, when I talk to clients about these, they are not as obvious as I would think they are. So we are going to talk about them. So let's go through some of the tools, boundaries you can set at work. The first one is take your lunch break. Okay, every day. And I don't mean eat your food at your desk. I mean leave your desk. I mean whether that's at home, whether you're in the office, doesn't matter. Take your lunch break. I don't care if your lunch break is 15 minutes. I don't care if it's an hour. Take your entire lunch break every single day. Leave your desk without fail. You need to do that. And again, this sounds obvious, but so many people feel guilty doing this and they feel like, oh, I'll fall behind. You're literally being paid to have a lunch break. At least, those of you in corporate and who are salaried, you are being paid to have a lunch break. Okay. So take your lunch break. If you're not taking your lunch break, you're working for free. Let me say that again. If you're not taking your lunch break, you are working for free. Okay. Nobody has time for that. And the thing is also is your brain needs a break. Your brain needs a break. It cannot go from 8 to 5 without a break. It just cannot. You need to take a break. You will be more productive and more efficient if you take that break. Then you can get back to your work and do it more efficiently than if you were to not take a break, be stressed. Also, they say multitasking, for example, eating lunch and trying to do work is actually, uh, it's not good for your digestion from what I've seen and studies I've read, but it's also not good for concentration and for multitasking. Like you would be able to get that task done faster if you just had lunch separately, then did the task versus trying to do the things at the same time. So again, like remove yourself. It's performance maintenance. It's strategy. You need to take that break. The next thing is start and end at your official hours. So, not as a reward when things are slow, as a non negotiable. So, if you're clocking in before your start time, if you're staying later than your end time, if you're on the train back home and you're checking your emails after 5 p.m., we need to stop that. Okay. And whether that is taking notifications off your phone, whether that is, creating those boundaries of shutting your laptop, like you need to not work over your time. Unless you're being paid overtime and you want to do it, you should not be working earlier than your start time or later than your start time. Because the thing is once you do it, it starts to become the norm, not only for you, but also for your team, for your boss. And then when you actually try to keep your hours, it's going to potentially cause friction because they've seen you going above and beyond. They've seen you doing too much. So I always tell clients this is that the best time to set boundaries is when you start a new role. You want to set those expectations up from day one. You want to set that up from day one. You want to make sure that you're setting those boundaries. What I even say is you should be pushing their boundaries, right? I always say if you're like in that type of job, leave early one day because you have something going on. Go to your doctor's appointment, like do all of those things and don't do more than you need to do to set that expectation. Next tip is take your vacations. Okay. Take your vacations and don't work on them. Absolutely don't. I went on vacation for 2 weeks at a time And I didn't check one email and not one person reached out to me and nothing happened. Obviously, we set up processes so that it could work. There was another leader in charge that my team could go to if they needed support, right? I had someone doing the admin tasks that needed to be done with our clients because I worked in marketing. So we had creative teams, we worked with clients. Like, obviously, everything was squared away. I did handovers, I did all the things before. So, like, everyone was prepped. I didn't leave them hanging, right? But they did not need me, okay? Unless you're like in a life or death type of job, like a doctor, you do not need to be on call when you're on vacation, okay? Of course, there are like a few extenuating circumstances, something deadline, only you have access to something, so you need to help someone, whatever, like those things, absolutely. But in general, you should not be working on your vacation and you should be taking your vacation. In the States, I think it's becoming more normalized, but in Europe, like most people have minimum like 4 weeks vacation a year. As you get older, you have more depending on where you live, months of paternity and maternity leave, parental leave, like those things are totally normalized in Europe. And I think, again, the States is getting better, but I do think we really need to normalize it. And it does to some extent. Yes, the company needs to be okay with it and they need to have good policies, but we as employees need to take advantage. We need to go on the vacation. We need to not check in. Like those things need to be normalized. And again, like if you leave for 2 weeks and things fall apart, then there's something wrong with the structure. Like there's something wrong with the structure. And that's how I knew I set my team up for success, is because when I went on vacation, they did not need me and in a dire situation. Like they absolutely did not. The next thing, which I kind of already mentioned in passing, but removing work email and notifications from your phone outside of work hours. So I, in my work, use Slack to talk to clients, and I have it on my laptop. I have the Slack app. There's no notifications that come through at any point in the day. I check Slack when I want to. I'm on when I want to be on. Obviously, I have guidelines with my freelance work of like when I need to be on, how many times a day, but it is not constantly. I do not need to respond to clients immediately. So I took notifications off and then I go in and check when I need to. Same with emails. So I have my emails for not just my work emails, but like all emails set so that at 8 p.m. every day, my phone turns on. I set it to like a focus mode. It's on like a personal that I created, and emails do not get pushed through at all. So that's also something you can do. But there's a lot of anxiety that can be caused by seeing the notifications pop up, seeing things come through. But I kind of believe in the like, what you don't see doesn't hurt you kind of thing, of like, if you're not seeing all the emails come through and you just look at it the next morning, then you didn't know there was a situation and then you'll solve it in the morning, right? And again, like most of our work is not necessary to be on call. So we have to really look at like, okay, is this necessary? And like you having to be on call 24 hours a day or feeling like you're on call is going to greatly affect your nervous system, and not in a good way. Something to think about. That's something that has really, really changed the game for me. The next thing is when you're asked to take on more work, you either say no or ask what needs to be deprioritized to make room. Now, this is if obviously you don't have capacity, but you should really be looking at your capacity as like if anything over 100% of what you're doing, anything that requires you to not take your lunch break, to stay early, stay later, come in earlier, whatever it is, that is over your capacity, right? Anything that you cannot do comfortably in your workday, that is over capacity. And in that case, instead of just saying, yes, I'll do it, how about we look at, okay, saying no, like, hey, right now, that's just not an option. I can start it in a week. Or asking like, okay, I'm super busy right now with all my other projects. What do you want me to deprioritize so that this can be prioritized? And really doing that. And again, this one is a little bit like political in terms of like the workplace politics, but this is how you can do it, right? Like you can say, I want to make sure I do this well. Can we talk about what can come off my plate to make room for this, right? That puts the prioritization back on the manager. where it actually belongs, because they should also be a good manager, should be looking at your workload and taking that into consideration. A couple more tips that are more related to mindset and nervous system regulation. So the first one is identifying your specific belief that's driving your overwork, which I did mention. And typically, what I see is like the most common ones are having to earn your place. So, not feeling confident enough and feeling like you need to earn your spot on the team. Another one is if I slow down, something will fall apart, feeling like if you're not constantly over managing everything, then something's going to fall apart. And then the third most common one I see is I'm only valuable when I'm producing. So, having that fear of like, or that ingrained feeling that you are only valuable to someone else when you are producing, which can cause you to go over, above, and beyond. So I just want you to sit with this and ask yourself, like, which one of these is the loudest for you, right? Because again, you can't work on a belief if you haven't named it first. So our first step, and what I want you to take away from this is like, we need to identify what the belief is as a number one, and then we can work on managing it. The next thing we need to do is work on decoupling productivity from safety. So this is definitely a longer term job, especially if this is something that you struggle with. But the first step is just noticing when anxiety spikes, right? Is it when you close your laptop at 5 p.m.? Is it when you say no to something? Is it when you take a lunch break? That spike in belief is activating. And again, we don't have to fix it immediately. Let's just notice it, notice that feeling, and notice in the beginning of where your work is, of when you're feeling that anxiety, so that then we can go to our next tool, which is the final tool I'm going to leave you with, nervous system regulation, which is so, so important. Obviously, as a base, because we want to, as a baseline, lower your nervous system, but also you can use it in situations when you're feeling stressed, anxious, when you're feeling triggered, right? This is not like wellness bullshit, okay? Your body cannot distinguish between a work deadline and a tiger chasing you. So just so we can understand our nervous system. So back in the day, we're talking like caveman era, right? They had to be on high alert for predators, right? Animals, other people, like they needed to be on high alert, okay? So, what would happen in your brain, in your nervous system, is your nervous system would like heighten, right? You'd have this spike in cortisol. Like, let's say they saw or they anticipated like a threat coming. They would have this spike, their nervous system would dysregulate, they would be on high alert. And then what happens is the blood in your brain leaves your brain and goes down to your legs. The reason for this is because you needed to be able to run faster and be more physically agile if a threat was coming, right? So your brain got dumber, so to speak, so your legs could be faster and you could feel physically stronger. Okay, so that's what would happen. Our brain has not evolved yet past that. So when we have like a work deadline, our brain, our body has the same or similar reaction as like a predator chasing us, right? When you're chronically overworked, your cortisol stays elevated, your body stays in fight or flight, and a lot of times no amount of intellectual reframing can fix it because it's literally physiological. So that's why nervous system regulation tools are so helpful, because it brings your baseline down. So you're not so dysregulated. So you don't have such high cortisol, right? Some of my favorite tools are breath work. I think breath work is super easy to do because nobody can see you doing it. So you can do it kind of on the go. I love a box breathing, which is inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, repeat. You can also do a 4 and a 7. So you breathe in for 4 and then you breathe out for 7. The goal is always to breathe out longer than you breathe in. Movement is really good for nervous system regulation, walking, stretching. Rest is really great, but not binging your Netflix rest, but like actually resting. Time outside, so grounding, putting your feet in the grass, in the sand, being in nature can be really great. And the reason these work is because basically it sends a signal to your brain and your nervous system that the danger isn't real, that you are safe, that it is okay to tap into yourself and be one with yourself. So these are kind of some of the best ones. I would just pick one. There's lots of other ones like meditation, EFT tapping. You should pick one that feels most aligned to you, something that you feel like you can actually do and that you can commit to. And what I always say is you should be doing this morning and night. So as soon as you wake up in the morning and then right before bed, that helps lower your baseline nervous system. And then also when you are triggered, when something does happen, then you can do it in those situations as well, which is super helpful. I just want to bring it back to my key point, which is nobody is coming to give you permission to stop, right? The companies that benefit from your overwork are not going to tell you that you are doing too much. The culture that taught you hustle was the answer is not going to correct itself. And again, I really want this, I don't want this to come across like it's blaming anybody because it's absolutely not. But we always talk about burnout from the perspective of what's happening to us. But we can also talk about it from the perspective of what we can do, what we have power and control over, because we do have power and control. And I always want women to feel like we have power in situations. It's just about figuring out where we have power and how we can help ourselves there. So, it's not easy. Like I still struggle with this on the day to day. I've obviously gotten a lot better because I've had really bad burnout in the past and now it's totally manageable and it's not necessarily burnout. I just feel myself like one day or the next day doing too much and then I reel myself in. But I really want you to think about this in yourself and really think deeply of like, what are those things that you're doing that are perpetuating your personal burden? And I think that's something that we should really, really think about and just like understanding like that you're holding the key and can your key unlock the cage that you put yourself in? Like, is that possible, right? And just, use this as a time to evaluate, take some of the things I said and journal on them, really try to understand where the limiting beliefs are coming from because it'll be much easier for you to then identify them and then implement changes from there. Okay. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was super helpful. It's a really important topic and something I've wanted to share for a while. So I'm so glad I got to do an episode on it. If you love the podcast, please leave a 5-star review. It would be much appreciated. And I hope y'all have an amazing week and I'll see you in the next episode.